72 of the Alumni Office, here with Albert Berger, class of 1975, of Bonafide Productions in Los Angeles. I'm going to give a brief overview of your career and then ask you a few questions, and we're going to aim for about a 15-minute interview.
Perfect.
Way more questions than time to cover. You attended Latin, you attended Tufts, and then Columbia for film school before moving to LA and becoming a screenwriter. And for the past, would you say 28 years you've been producing?
That's about right, yeah, 28 years.
Film, and then more recently television production, with a Best Film Academy Award under your belt for Nebraska, and films you worked on have many nominations and awards from all sorts of different organizations. Just a few of your films: Election, Cold Mountain, Little Miss Sunshine, Little Children, and Nebraska. And now The Leftovers on HBO, which is in its third and final season.
Exactly.
You also serve on multiple film-related boards and organizations, including serving as a governor for the producers branch of the Academy of Motion Pictures.
That's true.
This is Albert. Thanks for having us. So let's start at the top. For those people watching who aren't as knowledgeable about the industry like I am, what do you actually do as a producer, and how has that changed from when you started to now?
Well, it's pretty much been the same from the beginning. What you do as a producer is you find material that you think would be a good film, whether it's from a book or an idea or ideally a screenplay, but those are hard to come by, great screenplays. And you figure out how to turn it into a movie. So if it's a book, you have to develop a screenplay, you have to find somebody to pay for that, you have to then find a director, you have to find actors, you put the whole thing together, and then you see it through production and into editing and into marketing and out into the world. So the great thing about it is you're sort of the first person in and the last person out, and you have something in your mind from the very beginning, and it's always an exciting process to see how that ends up jiving with the end result.
Is there a difference between working in film and working on television?
A huge difference. And quite honestly, I'm not an expert in television. We've had one experience, and it wasn't something we were involved with on a day-to-day level. But it's an area we want to get more involved with. Television, it's sort of a great time for TV right now. And so whereas film used to be exclusively the area where you would want to go to explore filmmaking and stories and all that, now television is equally viable. So we're moving in that direction.
And is there a difference between network television and Netflix and Hulu and all of those organizations?
Oh yeah, no, there's a big difference. Network is, by its very definition, narrow because it's, it's more family oriented and less anything goes, and so we gravitate more towards cable or Amazon, Netflix, those kind of options.
Great. I read an interview or an article at some point in my background research, and there was a line saying that you are operating in the seam between independent film and studio film. Is that still a good niche? Is that still where you see yourself in the film market? It
is a good niche for us. Those are the kind of movies we like, and basically we always look for stuff, my partner Ron Yerxa and I, that we personally respond to, and those are the things we pursue. We're never really thinking much about the marketplace and what everybody else might like, because you really can't guess that. And so our taste happens to be, happens to be in that area that is sort of between independent film and the studios. And so those are the movies we respond to, the movies we look for, and the places we often collaborate with.
And where do you find most of your, either the screenplays or the books that you're looking to turn into films?
Well, initially when we were just starting as producers, nobody was sending us anything. So we would have to go and look for books that had sort of fallen through the cracks and that other people hadn't yet picked up. So, and it wasn't hard for us because those were really the kind of books we were most interested in, not mainstream fiction, but more eccentric stuff. And so That's what initially we were forced to look for, and then eventually people started sending us scripts and bringing us projects, and that made life easier. Little Miss Sunshine was, for instance, a screenplay that somebody we knew had written, and it's rare that you find something that's, that works out well as a screenplay. Usually you read something and you think, well, that'll be good, but you need this or that or change that. But it got to the point eventually where people were sending us, really good material.
As a former screenwriter yourself, are you ever tempted to actually do the revisions to any of the screenplays? Is that part of the producer role?
Well, I suppose it can be, and certainly in television, it's a big part of it. The producers are often the main writers, but for me, no, I don't really miss that, and very glad that somebody else is doing that work. But hopefully, from having been a screenwriter for 9 years, I'm able to give the writer notes that are helpful and not destructive. And so, I always try and imagine what the writer is trying to do or the director, and embrace that to whatever degree I can, and hopefully that matches what we had in mind in the first place. And sometimes you just have to acknowledge that where you thought something was going isn't necessarily where it's going, and that's not bad. That's a great thing about film, is it's a collaboration. There's a lot of people involved, and it's very alive. It's not like a novel where what you read is exactly what the author wrote. In this case, there are actors and cinematographers and especially a director and a lot of other people that are interpreting their aspect of the story, and that's what makes it unique.
So what are you working on now?
Right now we're just finishing a movie that we made for Amazon called Only Living Boy in New York. And it's a screenplay that we've been working on for 12 years. A fellow named Alan Loeb, a Chicago guy, wrote it, and actually my sister, Elizabeth Berger, was the one that had put this project in touch with us, a guy named John Fogel, who I might have gone to Latin. He had this script that Alan Loeb wrote, and he brought it to us, and we developed it for 6 months and then set it up at a studio, and it ended up going on a long journey between different studios and directors and different actors involved, and ultimately we made it with a director named Mark Webb, and it's with a young British actor named Callum Turner is playing the lead, and Jeff Bridges, Pierce Brosnan, Kate Beckinsale, Cynthia Nixon, and Kiersey Clemens. That's the cast, and it'll come out in August.
Oh, that's soon.
It's a little bit like The Graduate. It's a young kid just out of college trying to find his way in the world of sort of Upper West Side, rarefied New York. And he gets in a very complex situation with his father and his father's mistress and a strange man that moves in next door that becomes his advisor. So it's a lot of twists and turns.
Sounds great. We'll be watching for
please,
for sure.
Please keep your eye out.
Are there a lot of Chicago connections here in LA that you end up running into or working with?
Yeah, there are. There's a healthy group of us that landed out here. Bill Horberg, who is a dear friend from high school, that ultimately he lived with me in Boston. He was at Berklee College of Music, and I was at Tufts. And then we went back and ran a movie theater together in Chicago, the Sandberg Movie Theater. And then later he moved out to LA after I did, and we ultimately ended up producing Cold Mountain together. And he's a very dear friend that I work with and see and still communicate with. And Jeff Pone is another one who sort of inspired me to become a filmmaker. He was very early, onto film and was an excellent director and, sort of inspiration to a lot of us. And also Lonnie Ruman is out here producing film after film, which I didn't even know about until I read it in the Latin Gazette or whatever it's called, the alumni news. But then I met with Lonnie. I thought he was joking. I thought he was pulling one over on you, and it turned out he had financed and written and produced a bunch of movies. So what do you know? He kept it a secret from me. But and then Mitch Siskind is out here, who was a great teacher of ours, and Steve Schwartz is in Palm Springs, another great teacher of ours. So these were all the guys that Steve and Mitch and Greg Baker that encouraged us all, and then you know, we all landed out here and pursued it in one way or another. So.
Did your interest in filmmaking and producing, how far back does that go for you? How old were you when you started?
Well, filmmaking, you know, probably started, well, or film loving. I loved going to movies when I was a kid, but then it was really Steve Schwartz at Latin who taught things like film noir, or he taught science fiction, and you'd read all these science fiction novels, and he'd, you know, just pop culture, and he kind of taught that there was an importance to this new art form, film, that was on equal footing with, you know, painting, and deserved to be appreciated in the same way that, you know, art history looks at painting, and also literature. And so there's a great English department. Mitch Siskind taught creative writing. Greg Baker taught all sorts of unusual classes there. And I think it was those teachers combined with the very sort of buttoned-up conservative veneer of Latin, and beneath the surface, I think there was a lot of sort of pushing up against the boundaries going on, and I think that, you know, helped, you know, sort of instigate an interest in things like the arts and film and stuff like that amongst a lot of us. So.
Tell me more about the Sandberg Theater.
Well, that was kind of Bill's idea. I ran the film series at Tufts, and so first an alternative film series where we showed all sorts of old movies and obscure art house kind of stuff, and then the regular film series. And Bill at the time was living with me while I was doing that and programming it and all that, and we used to watch 16 millimeter movies at our house off campus at Tufts. And then Bill went back to Chicago and found out that the old Playboy movie theater had been abandoned and the lease was available, and he looked into it and thought, well, wouldn't it be great to open a movie theater and show older movies along the same lines that we were doing at Tufts? And you know, I thought it sounded like an exciting idea, and asked to, by that time I'd gotten into Columbia Film School, but I asked to take a year off, and I went back to run the movie theater with Bill, and we lasted about a year and a half before we went out of business. But it was quite an exciting time, and a lot of interesting people were hanging around. It was kind of the center of a certain film culture in Chicago at that time. So
It sounds great. What building is that today?
it's a Walgreens. It's on the corner of Dearborn and Division.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, so, but at the time, it had formerly been the Playboy Theater, and there were bunnies on the carpet and swanky rocking chairs, but it had been abandoned, so there were a lot of rats and stuff like that. People don't realize that in most movie theaters you'll find rats. I hope that doesn't decrease people heading out to the theater, but that's what happens in the big city. So.
There you go,
Yeah.
for sure. Taking a bit of a turn, what's your work like for the Academy as a governor? How much time do you spend with that, and what do you do other than voting?
Well, it takes up a lot of time. The Academy has been under a big transformation. There's a museum that is being built and designed and all that as we speak, and that's going to be, I think, the premier movie museum in the world. And so that's a big, big undertaking. And also, there's been a real move to diversify the Academy and to open it up to new members. And, you know, it's been traditionally women and minorities were very underrepresented. And there's been a big move to try and open up to different people, different voices. And I think it's very important, very happy to be there at the time that that's all going on. So, you know, it's a big balancing act there. You want to maintain, you know, the excellence and the qualities of the past, and yet at the same time, you really need to recognize that that films speak to a lot more diverse audiences than they did in the past, and you have to acknowledge that, and it's a good thing that it's evolving in that way. So So those are, some of the ongoing growth issues that we deal with as governors.
I read at some point that you serve on several different committees that seem to me to be broadening that reach or lowering the barriers to entry, grants, fellowships, education, and outreach. What about those speaks to you?
Well, I think that's the most important work of the Academy. People know the Academy because of the Academy Awards, and it was exciting this year. That was quite a wild evening and event. But really, the Academy gives $500,000 a year in grants to all sorts of underserved communities. There's a program in Chicago that's very interesting, run through the Chicago Film Festival, that opens up to the public schools there, that the Academy supports. And there's a great program, for instance, the San Francisco Jewish Film Festival has a program on immigration films and the importance of immigrants in all over the world and refugees. And so there are movies like El Norte about immigrants from the South that come to America, and there's documentaries about Syrian refugees and all sorts of programs that they're putting on, and the Academy supports all these things. So as well as mentorship programs and things like that. And so it's very valuable, and it's all the result of the Oscar telecast, which creates revenue for the Academy and then allows us to give grants to various places.
I read a little bit about another organization you've been involved with called We Do It Together.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Which I thought was really intriguing. What's the idea behind that?
Well, that's another example of trying to open up the film industry to, in this case, to women directors. And it's kind of shockingly low how few women directors there are. And, it's not really easy to explain why that's happened, because obviously women are a major part of the movie-going experience, and women's stories are, of equal importance to men's, but somehow there are very few women directors. So it's an organization that's devoted to cultivating new voices as far as women directors. And the first project is an omnibus film where 6 or 7 women from all over the world are directing short films, often with the topic of gender inequality, but some as comedy, some as drama, and it's a way to kind of support new voices in filmmaking.
Speaking of directing, at Columbia you studied directing as well as screenwriting. You've already said you're done with the screenwriting part. Any interest in directing ever?
Well, not really. I mean, it's I had no idea when I was in film school that producing is what ultimately I would gravitate towards. In fact, I had no interest in it whatsoever. And, what I learned as a screenwriter is you're completely dependent on other people. You can go ahead and write your own script, but then somebody else has to buy it or sign on to it. And I was only able, with my writing partner, to get work writing on other people's projects, and it was often comedies, and a certain type of comedy that I wouldn't necessarily have even wanted to go see, or let alone make. And once the script was written, the filmmaker would take it, or the producer, or whatever, and that was the last you saw of it. And I wasn't really participating in the filmmaking process. And it wasn't until it started to dawn on me that as a producer, you can choose your own project. You can read a book, and if you like that book, you don't even need to necessarily option it. If it's available, you can go find a filmmaker, go find a writer, go find somebody that you think would be best to execute it, and you can put it together. And you can be working on a lot of different things at once. When you're a screenwriter, it's like one project at a time. When you're a director, it's one project at a time. When you're a producer, you can be editing one thing, you can be casting another, you can be developing another, you can be, marketing. There's a lot going on, and I like the diversity of being able to work on different things. So, and not being dependent on other people to say yes to you. So.
This is my last question.
Sure.
What is something your classmates and friends from Latin would be surprised to know about the grown-up Albert Berger?
I guess trying to corral a teenage son has proved to be ambitious. I think we were a lot sneakier back then, and our parents were, at least it's my belief, were much less aware of what we were up to. And these days, maybe now being on the other side of the fence, I'm doing a lot of wrangling, and so I'm not sure they'd be surprised by that, but it would maybe give them a smile. So
That's great. Any last
You know what I'm
thoughts?
talking about.
I do know. Any last thoughts? Things to share with the alumni community?
No, I think I have very, very fond memories of Latin, and it's not as though it wasn't difficult being in high school and all the attendant traumas one goes through and everything, but I think it was really a great, great education. Maybe harder in a lot of ways than anything I've had since, college, film school. And I think that was a great thing, that you really had to work hard there, and you appreciated what you were learning, and it helped me continue to try and learn, and I appreciate that.
That's great. Well, and we appreciate you. We appreciate you taking the time to sit down with us.
No, thank you.
And thanks so much.
Okay, take
care.
care. Hey, everyone.